So I think if I can get a thumbs up from the panelists that we're ready to get going. All right, perfect. Still a little strange not having a live audience in front of us, but we are making do. So hello, everyone. My name is Amy Consalvi, and I am the Director of Education and Visitor Services at the Museum of Russian Icons. I am here today with the curators of our special exhibition, Tradition and Opulence, Easter in Imperial Russia. This exhibition would not have been possible without the extreme generosity and trust of our exhibit lenders, and I would like to extend a huge thank you to them on behalf of the staff and the Board of Trustees of the museum. I also want to thank the Russian Imperial Foundation and the Russian Store for their generous financial support. And as always, I want to thank you, our audience, for joining us today. And in the spirit of generosity, I would kindly ask everyone to consider making a donation to the museum, especially during this turbulent time, so we can continue producing remarkable exhibitions and delivering quality programs. Before we get started, I'll explain how today's program will work. After we get through the introductions, I will jump into an exhibition preview so we can have some context for the program today. Then I will turn it over to our wonderful curators. And at the end of the program, we will ask the audience to submit their questions using the Q&A feature, which for most of you should be on the bottom portion of your screen. So please use that instead of the chat. And feel free to submit your questions at any time. And if a question is directed towards a specific panelist, then please just indicate that. Now, I would like to introduce our curators in the order that they are speaking today. Karen Kettering received her doctorate in art history from Northwestern University. Her dissertation was a study of sculptor Natalia Danko's career in the late Imperial and Soviet periods. She has held positions as curator of Russian art at Hillwood Museum and Gardens and senior specialist in the Department of Russian Art at Sotheby's. The author of studies on Russian and European decorative arts, design, icons, and paintings, her research has focused most recently on the creation of a market for Russian art in America and the history of Russian portrait diamonds. She currently heads an art advisory and appraisal firm. Hi, Karen. Next, we have Dimitry Gurevich. Dimitry specializes in the research and attribution of the artifacts pertaining to the Christian faith. He co-curated Opulence Rediscovered, the Romanov liturgical silver at the Museum of Russian Icons, has presented at academic conferences, and has authored scholarly texts for books, catalogs, journals, and museum publications. And finally, we have Nicholas B.A. Nicholson. He began his career as a specialist in the Russian Works of Art department at Christie's, New York, and served as the American curator of Jewels of the Romanovs, Treasures of the Russian Imperial Court. He has published and lectured widely on Russian topics and runs his own firm, Nicholson Advisory. So thank you, all three of you, for the tremendous work that you've done on this exhibition, and I'm very happy that you'll be joining us today for this roundtable. So we will jump into the exhibition preview. So let me share my screen here so you can all get a taste of the exhibit. So what I've done is create a slide for each section of the exhibition. And what I'm going to be doing is just reading a few excerpts from the panels that go with each of the sections. I figured that was a much safer route than me trying to interpret these wonderful objects, as I am certainly not the expert here. So Tradition and Opulence, Easter in Imperial Russia. From opulent jeweled creations to humble embroidered examples, perhaps no country is more closely associated with the tradition of exchanging decorated Easter eggs than Russia. Easter, the Feast of Feasts, is the most important festival in the Orthodox Christian liturgical calendar, commemorated by church services, music, public processions with icons, exchanges of gifts, and feasting. We start the exhibition with Easter in Holy Russia, where we really examine the iconography and related liturgical objects that go with this feast day. The iconography drew from the Byzantine tradition depicting Christ's descent into the underworld to smash the gates of hell and free the souls of the righteous of the Old Testament. In this section, we explore the iconography of Easter and objects related. We then transition into the history and traditions of decorating Easter eggs. The tradition dates back to over 1,000 years. And as the many eggs in this exhibition show, they could be made of almost any material. And I just want to pause a moment and mention that the images you're seeing are just a very, very small sample of what is actually on view. Hopefully you will all make it to the museum once we reopen, and you will just be blown away with the sheer quantity of objects in this exhibition that has been beautifully integrated into our permanent galleries. And I also want to quickly mention that we will be producing a catalog to go with this exhibition, authored by our curators, and that will be for sale in our museum shop. And it'll be available around mid-June, so pay attention to our website, because we will certainly be making a big announcement when that comes out. And of course, we can't have Easter in Russia without Fabergé. So in this third section, we explore Fabergé's jeweled pendant eggs. Small pendant eggs made by jewelers were almost unique to Imperial Russia. Each was a work of art: enameling, goldwork, gemstones, carving of semi-precious stones, and other techniques could be combined to produce a wide range of styles. Continuing in the vein of Fabergé, the Easter egg lived on throughout the year in Russia, becoming a permanent and surprisingly useful fixture. Whether it was selected for photograph frames, desk clocks, or containers for sweets, the egg was used even in cases where an object's function might not easily lend itself to the distinct shape. After the holiday was finished, pendant eggs were put away, but people continued to wear jewelry and carry accessories decorated with popular symbols of the holiday, particularly lilies of the valley and 3- and 4-leaf clover. We move on to the beautiful and delicate porcelain Easter eggs at the Russian imperial court. Beginning in the 17th century and during the reigns of Alexander III from 1881 to 1894 and Nicholas II from 1894 to 1917, courtiers, members of the military, and others would receive eggs with the imperial monogram of a member of the imperial family or with state symbols. As had been the case centuries before, the recipient's rank determined the size and type of egg he or she would receive. So monograms and symbols were not the only thing you would find painted on these eggs. The Imperial Porcelain Factory created eggs with different sorts of decoration for members of the imperial family to give as gifts at Easter. The most labor-intensive and expensive were those with intricately detailed miniatures produced during the reign of Emperor Nicholas I from 1825 to 1855. And to bring us almost full circle, we have icon painting on the eggs. Icon painting always influenced the decoration of Easter eggs. In the late 19th century, tastes at court shifted away from the images in the Western European tradition toward Russian icon painting of the 16th and 17th centuries. So you see here in the images in the center egg, we have an icon, and you would also have enameled eggs that had little doors on them opening to reveal a beautiful icon inside. This is personally one of my favorite sections, these beautiful spring blossoms. Spring blossoms were a natural subject for decorating Easter eggs. Popular dictionaries with titles like The Language of Flowers explain the symbolic, emblematic, or biblical meanings painted blossoms might convey. Viewers would understand that the flowers in a bouquet could represent a sentimental or religious meaning in addition to its natural beauty. And for those of us who received a little bit of snow this morning, hopefully our spring blossoms survived the storm. And always on trend, the Imperial Porcelain Factory's artists sought to create objects worthy of presentation by the imperial family, as the Easter eggs they gave as gifts reflected the latest developments in art and design. In 1889, chemists at the factory formulated a fashionable oxblood glaze, resulting in rich variations in color and occasional abstract patterns. And I remember this beautiful glazed egg that you see on the screen. When we were photographing these objects, our photographers were absolutely astounded that this was an older object. They couldn't believe it. They thought it was something that was produced maybe a year or two ago. So really, Russian modernism was really ahead of its time in a lot of ways. And even though much of this exhibition focuses on the imperial family and the imperial court, we of course know that Easter was celebrated well beyond the walls of the court. And instead of beautiful porcelain eggs or opulent enamel designs, the common people would have these postcards featuring these sort of unique images with, of course, eggs on them. So a little bit more affordable, personally, but still quite unique and quite beautiful. And we end the exhibition with the Great War. As we know, Russia entered the conflict that came to be known as the Great War on August 1st, 1914. The imperial family, the nobility, and court suppliers mobilized in their own way. Men joined their regiments, women founded and supplied hospitals, and the court jewelers and imperial porcelain factory produced new works dedicated to the Red Cross and Russian military. It's important to note that these great feasts were still celebrated at the front, which I feel like really drives the point home just how important Easter was to the Russian people. It was more than just a holiday, it was really a fabric of their culture. So hopefully that gets everybody excited to come out to the museum and see the exhibit. I will turn it over to Karen once I stop sharing my screen, and she will take it from there.
Okay, and here we go. This should work. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to have you with us. I'm so glad to be with anyone and to be anywhere but the grocery store or home. So thank you very much for joining us on your Saturday. I'll be taking you through one part of the exhibition, Tradition and Opulence, Eastern Imperial Russia. And I hope very much that you'll soon be able to visit the exhibition in its entirety. A lot of work has gone into it on behalf of the museum, on the part of the museum staff. So we would all like to see you. And well, I'll be focusing on Fabergé. As Amy just so ably showed, the exhibition includes objects ranging from precious porcelain eggs gifted by members of the imperial family to really simple but lovely postcards exchanged during the holiday. You see here on the left the cover of the exhibition catalog that will be available soon and beautifully designed by Mary Delaney of the museum staff. When paging through catalogs of works by Fabergé and the firm's Russian competitors, it's striking to see how many designs are based on the form of the chicken or duck's egg, the most common kind traditionally decorated for the celebration of Easter. As we'll see in what follows, the Easter egg lived on throughout the year, becoming a permanent and surprisingly useful fixture in the home long after the miniature pendant eggs had been put away. Easter was, in a way, every day. And before we put the pendant eggs away, I thought you might enjoy the photo on the right of Maria Radzianko, born Princess Golitsyn. And you see her pendant, her necklace of pendant eggs on the right, and that is in the exhibition. Most everything I will show you is in the exhibition, and I'll tell you when things are not. Whether it was selected for photograph frames or desk clocks, the egg was used even in cases where an object's function might not easily lend itself to the very distinct shape, such as these frames by Fabergé from the McFerrin collection, and the egg-shaped Fabergé desk clock carved from pale green bowenite, a semi-precious stone abundant in Russia and much favored by Fabergé's designers, as just this small sample shows. If you think back to photograph frames you've seen, the apertures are invariably circular, square, rectangular, or oval, or 99%. Have you seen a frame with an egg-shaped aperture, like the frame at lower left? Have you seen a frame that is not only egg-shaped in outline, but also in 3 dimensions, as is the case with the little bowenite egg at the upper left? Throughout the exhibition, as you'll see, we've relied quite heavily on the collection of the McFerrin family, which was assembled in part with a real focus on Fabergé's egg-shaped objects meant for year-round use. And that was, I'd say, that suggested part of the exhibition to me. Useful luxuries in the form of eggs were not invented by the Russian master goldsmiths and jewelers around 1900. Their predecessors in 17th and 18th century Europe designed small ornamental cases with interiors arranged to hold scent bottles, thimbles, small pencils, nail files, or other implements for writing, sewing, manicures, or the toilette. Called nécessaires, a term that's probably self-explanatory, they were frequently ovoid and, like Fabergé's later works inspired by them, were carved from colorful semi-precious stones or made of gold that was enameled and set with gemstones. The absolutely extraordinary nécessaire at upper right is one of the centerpieces of the collection of gold work in the State Hermitage Museum. It is, some of you might know, it is also the inspiration of one of Fabergé's eggs, a 1903 egg. And it's thought to have been an Easter gift to the future Empress Elizabeth of Russia by the French ambassador at the Russian court. This incredibly luxurious gold egg-shaped nécessaire held a perfume bottle, scissors, files, a mirror, and a small clock or watch by one of the leading clockmakers of the day. That at the left is a more modest example that would have been worn on the wearer's dress and contained many useful miniature tools, including scissors, a thimble, tweezers, toothpick, and this always delights small children, even a small spoon for removing earwax. One of the most important and useful containers for the history of Fabergé is this 18th century French golden egg nécessaire on the left. Neither of these objects on the screen now are in the exhibition. That on the left can be separated into 5 parts: ivory eggshell, gold eggshell, hin, crown, and ring. And it could also be converted into use as a vessel for scented water. It had been a gift to Caroline Matilda, Queen of Denmark and Norway. It passed down through the generations to Queen Louise, mother of Russian Empress Maria Fyodorovna, recipient of the first Fabergé Imperial Easter egg in 1885. Caroline's egg nécessaire is often cited as the inspiration for the design of the 1885 egg, and I think you can see why and what personal meaning it would have had for the recipient. So these earlier nécessaires holding scent bottles or other cosmetic tools certainly served as inspiration for designs like the egg-shaped cosmetic case for powder by Fabergé, and once in the collection of King George of Hellenes. It's now part of the McFerrin collection, and it will be in the exhibition as soon as it opens. This, the enameled gold egg opens to reveal a compartment for powder, and at one time there would have been a small puff, probably made of ostrich feathers. The use of a case like this, of course, was not limited to just the Easter season. Those Russians unable to purchase a gold cosmetics case from Fabergé might still carry with them every day an engraved silver egg-shaped coin purse as they went about their daily business. They might drink their tea every day from an egg-shaped cup with cover made in St. Petersburg at the Kornilov Brothers factory. So, as you saw in this very brief run-through, we can trace the origins of many of Fabergé's egg-shaped useful objects to 18th century models. The egg-shaped photograph frame by Fabergé or his competitors, however, has no counterpart in the 18th century. We don't find 18th century portrait miniatures set in egg-shaped frames, for example, similar in conception to the Fabergé frame containing photos of 2 of Queen Victoria's grandchildren that you see on the right. This is one of the firm's most interesting designs, it seems to me, particularly if we recall how photograph frames were displayed around 1900. In wealthier homes across Europe and the Americas, dense accumulations of photograph frames were displayed on desks and tables, usually set among a profusion of stamp moisteners, paperweights, glue pots, and desk clocks. the sum of which consumed almost half of the working space. This desk, by the way, has been tidied for photography, so you can imagine what it might look like while in active use. In an age of minimalism and downsizing, we might view such crowded arrangements negatively. Some psychologists now even warn that a cluttered home can harm our emotional well-being. I read an entire article about this in the New York Times. Where we today might see clutter, however, Fabergé's original customers saw a tender gathering of those closest to them. Literary scholar Murray Rustin is an expert on Dickens and thought a lot about England and generally the European royal world around 1900. He observed that Queen Victoria's desk at Osborne House may have left her little space for writing, but the many family photographs and mementos on it provided her with a personal enclave and a buffer from the often inhospitable realities of daily life. The photos you see here show her desk around 1900 and as it has been constructed for visitors to Osborne House today. The size of the defensive wall of photos is even more formidable on the desk of Emperor Nicholas II, of course, one of Fabergé's primary customers. If you have a minute to count, which you probably don't, but let me just tell you, there are at least 25 photos of his closest family members on his desk, and even more on the shelves behind it. While preparing for this lecture, I really struggled with how to bring this idea of a group of photos as a personal enclave and buffer to life. And so much of the interest in things like Marie Kondo and downsizing have really made these things feel very, almost foreign to us these days. Unfortunately, COVID-19 did a lot of my work for me. As we all now struggle with inhospitable realities of daily life, we too seek respite in the images of those closest to us. I think we can all remember the relief we felt in March and April at seeing the faces closest to us on Zoom, FaceTime, or other similar platforms. My family has got a big Mother's Day thing organized for tomorrow with all the moms in our family. At a time of great anxiety and fear, combined with enforced or recommended separation, many of us have sought to bridge those physical gaps through images of our loved ones. The efforts to orchestrate the McMorran's family's 30-person call over 4 continents is closely connected to arranging half of the surface of your desk with carefully selected family photos, each placed in a unique and valuable frame. Again, while desks and rooms with dozens of family photos might seem to be crying out for Marie Kondo and anti-clutter consultants, the memoirs of Georgy Graf, a personal secretary to Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich in exile, reminds us that contemporaries found these arrangements more comforting than oppressive. Graf visited Villa Fyodorov, Empress Maria Fyodorovna's home outside Copenhagen, shortly after her death in 1928. I apologize to all Danes for my poor pronunciation. Graf described the rooms, which you see here, as, quote, cozy, crammed with soft furniture, tables and shelves on which frames with family pictures and ornaments were placed, likely the cherished souvenirs of the deceased Dowager Empress. While such a profusion of objects now seems to be the problem, they were once the solution. I hope you can see they were once the solution to the ills of modern daily life. The egg shape of a photograph frame is not just a caprice. It appears so often in Fabergé's work because the egg, symbol of life and renewal, completes the primary work or the job of a photograph frame on a crowded desk. It draws close, distant, or departed family members, even if only visually. It's no surprise that Fabergé's customers sought to live year-round with precious objects recalling the most important and joyous season of the liturgical calendar, particularly when combined with the images of equally precious persons. The many family photographs in particular underline the promise of renewal and resurrection that are central to the holiday and recall the joyful celebrations that accompany it. And with that, I turn you over to my colleague, Dimitry Gurevich, for more on the topic of resurrection.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Amy. I would like to talk to you today about the iconography of the Orthodox Easter. And we have a lot of ground to cover, so I hope you're going to be following me, and I'm going to be moving slides rather quickly, so some of you who have slow connections might experience a little bit of a delay. So first, I want to start my presentation with reminding you what today is the 75th anniversary of the victory in World War II, widely celebrated in Russia and other countries. And it's an equivalent of VE Day celebrated in the United States and Western Europe yesterday. And since my story will be about the battle of good and evil, I would like to remind you what our countries, Russia and America, were on the same side of the battle during the World War II, which is evident from this wonderful archival photograph showing American and Soviet soldiers standing together like two friends. So the iconography of the Orthodox Easter. It would be too ambitious for me to describe the entire iconography in my short talk, so I would like to concentrate on just one most common image used in the Russian iconography at the Easter period and try to explain you what the symbology behind it in the story. And my goal is very practical. So when you look at the objects like this one, which is a little brass plaquette measuring 3 by 4 inches, you would be able not only to recognize the character on it, but the symbolism behind it. So we have a lot of ground to cover, and please follow me. It felt to me what it would be easier to explain you the iconography on the larger icon, which not only uses a greater detail, but also uses color to differentiate different character shown in the image. This is a 19th century Russian icon from the village of Mystura, which specializes in the traditional depiction of Russian icons. And what do we see on this icon? We have 3 planes on it. In the middle, we see a figure in the divine light, standing full figured. And below that, we see the same figure descending to what seems to be Hades or hell. And above, we see a walled garden. And we'll go through those planes one by one, explaining each one and trying to understand their symbolic meaning. We'll start with the middle panel, which upon close-up clearly shows a figure of Christ who is blessing with his right hand while stepping out of the empty tomb with the burial shroud still inside of the tomb. Of course, the Western viewers would find this subject to be very familiar. And indeed, it came in the end of 16th century or the beginning of 17th century from the Western examples to Russia, and specifically from engravings, which made their way to Russia. And here you can see circa 1600 engraving depicting Christ coming out of the empty tomb with sleeping Roman soldiers around him, some of them waking up in horror. And if we look at this little Russian porcelain plaque, which came from the cover of the Gospels, we see a similar scene with the Christ striving from the empty tomb, except instead of Roman soldiers, we see an angel who is miraculously opening the door to the tomb. And here we see a Russian Orthodox icon dating to the end of the 19th century, in which two subjects are combined. We have Christ floating above the empty tomb. We have the Roman soldier sleeping on the right, and the angel opening the lid to the sepulchre on the left. So now when we look back at the detail, this part of the icon becomes rather clear to us, with one example, with one exception, I'm sorry. And the exception is Christ is not striving towards heavens, but rather stepping down in the invisible ladder. And where is he stepping down to? Well, that is what is shown on the lower part of the icon. It's the Hades, or hell, he is coming to, and he is surrounded by many figures, all doing different things. It seems like a chaos. So let's try to sort it out. And before we do that, I want to mention what this iconography is rather ancient. Unlike the iconography of the top part of the icon, which came in the 17th century, this iconography came to us straight from the Byzantine. And this is, we see in front of us is the oldest surviving example of this iconography found in the illustration or illumination of Trebizond Gospel, dating to the 10th century Byzantium, and found in the National Library of Russia in St. Petersburg. So in order for us to understand the bottom part of the icon, we need to appreciate what it's in fact is an illustration of Gospel of Nicodemus, also known as the Acts of Pilate. And what is the Gospel of Nicodemus? It's a part of Apocrypha, or the non-canonical part of the Bible, which were not included in the standard canonical texts, like the four main Gospels. And at the same time, this text was widely known and never prohibited by the official church. But who was this man, Nicodemus? Luckily for us, he is mentioned in the canonical Gospel of John, who says, "Now there was a Pharisee, a man named Nicodemus, who was a member of the Jewish ruling council. He came to Jesus at night and said, 'Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him.' Jesus replied, 'Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they're born again.'" So from this text, we realize what not only Nicodemus was a very important character in the Bible who personally met Jesus, but also discussed with Jesus one of the most important concepts of Christianity, the concept of being born again. Not only Nicodemus met Jesus while he was alive, but he also participated in Christ's burial. And here you see a Western painting clearly depicting Nicodemus in the middle holding Christ's dead body while surrounded by three Marys and St. Joseph of Arimathea. So what does the Gospel of Nicodemus tells us? It's a short text in the English translation, is about 28 pages, broken in two sections. In the first section, it's rather standard text describing Christ's life and passion, starting from the time when the high priest of Israel with the ruling council comes to Pilate and asks him to arrest Jesus and put him to death for doing blasphemous things, such as calling himself a king of Israel, son of God, and even curing people on Sabbath. Then the text goes through the entire Passion of Christ in a pretty linear manner, parallel to other Gospels, and goes through his crucifixion and to the empty tomb with no body of Jesus in it. Interestingly, Nicodemus, who is pictured in this image on the right side is an old man holding the burial shroud of Jesus, names three important characters from the scene of the crucifixion, which are not named in other Gospels. Those characters are two thieves being crucified next to Jesus. Gestas on the left, shown as a dark person, and as a light body on the right is Dismas, a good thief. And also he names the centurion who pierced the body of Christ and gives his name as a legend. The story gets very interesting at the end of the first part when the Jewish ruling council decides to investigate the empty tomb of Jesus with no body in it. And they find several witnesses who tell them that Jesus left the tomb, got resurrected, and ascended to the heavens. But they don't believe him because they're all followers of Jesus and cannot be trusted. But suddenly, one of the people in the ruling council remembers that there are two people, those two brothers who were sons of Simeon, and everybody knows what they died and they're buried. But now they've been seen again praying in their house and not talking to anyone. So they think if they can bring those two brothers to the Jewish council and make them talk, maybe they can tell the story and open the mystery of the resurrection, because they obviously came from the dead. So they bring those two brothers, put them in separate rooms, give them pen and paper, and ask them to write their story. And then they tell the story, which is portrayed in the second part of the gospel. And that's the story of harrowing of hell. In this, basically, they write both an identical story, word for word, how they came to the dark place, and suddenly, and that place was, in that place they met all the prophets of the past who were standing there, and suddenly they saw a divine light, and they saw a voice saying, "Open the doors of hell, the King of Glory is coming." And they hear a conversation between the Prince of Hell, shown here on the left bottom corner as a red monster with open jaws, and Satan, who is shown on the right bottom corner as a green person. Unfortunately, you can only see his head in this picture. And the Prince of Hell asks Satan, what's that noise? And what does it all mean? And Satan says, well, Jesus Christ is coming, and he is a very powerful man. On one side, he is a man who is afraid of death, but on the other side, he has divine powers, and he even liberated Lazarus, who was firmly in our domain, and made him alive again. So the Prince of Hell gets rather worried and asks the Hades to be closed with the bronze doors and locked with all the locks and chained with all the chains, and even put the metal bars on the doors to protect them. But Christ comes and breaks the doors unhinged, steps on them, and pulls Adam and Eve and all the prophets out of hell and into the paradise. And that's exactly what's depicted on this image. You can see Christ standing on the unhinged doors of hell, broken up in a cruciform pattern, and pulling Adam by his wrist, pointing towards the paradise. You can see it even better in the 17th century icon, in which the scene is isolated. You can see Christ coming down on what looks like a tunnel in the divine light, standing on the doors of hell, pulling out Adam, with Eve waiting on the right, and all the prophets are behind him with clearly identifiable David and Solomon with the crowns, and St. John the Baptist behind them. But what happened to Satan? Well, Satan lost. So he was bound by angels on order of Christ, and he was bound and nailed to the surface, as you can see here, for 1,000 years. And now we get to the upper portion of the icon, which is a bit confusing because action in there is going without any order. So please follow the numbers and as I put them in the picture to clearly identify different scenes. The red wall with the entrance, as you probably realize by now, is the gates of paradise. So if you see at the number 1, St. John the Baptist, David and Solomon, identifiable by the crowns, come to the gates of paradise, and they see a figure there. And the figure in there is rather disheveled and doesn't look like a saint. So they ask him, "Who are you? You look like a criminal. How did you end up in a paradise? And how did you end up in a paradise even before us?" And that figure tells them, "Yes, indeed, I am a criminal, and I did many heinous crimes while I was alive. My name is Dismas, and I'm a thief, and I was crucified with our Lord." And then we go on number 2, and he says, "But when I was dying, I believed what Christ was a King of glory, and I asked him, 'Can you please bring me to the kingdom of God when you go there?' And Christ said, 'You can go to the kingdom of God right now, and I give you the sign of the cross.' And as you can see, he is holding a little red cross. And when you get to the gates, so when you look at number 3, you see Dismas is coming to the gates, and see the angel, just tell him the story and show him the sign of the cross in your hands, and he'll let you in. And as you can see, the angel above number 3, shown as a seraphim with 6 wings, let him through. And when he went into paradise, he found 2 people in there, and that's number 4. Those people, they're prophets Enoch and prophet Elijah. And as we know, Enoch ascended to heavens while he was still alive, and Elijah ascended to heaven as well in the chariot of fire, drawn by the celestial horses. So now when we look at this icon, it becomes rather clear what's going on. So let's reiterate. In the middle, Christ is coming from the empty tomb. On his sides are armies of good and evil. On his left are angels, and on the right is the army of hell. Then he goes to the Hades on the bottom, saves Adam and Eve and other prophets out of jaws of hell and Satan, and brings them to the paradise, where they all meet the good thief, and the good thief tells his story. And even when we look at this miniature example, we can easily recognize all the characters and understand the story behind them. Down to the Prince of Hell, shown on the left bottom corner, and the seraphim with 6 wings at the gates of heaven, shown on the right upper corner. And of course, when the museum exhibit opens, you can see the objects in the museum in a different light. For example, those 3 beautiful lacquer papier-mâché eggs made by Locutin factory in the 19th century. On the left, you can see Christ rising from the empty tomb, which is a Western depiction showing the sleeping soldiers and the angel. In the middle, you have a shorthand for Christ coming to the Hades and saving Adam, while Eve is waiting on the right with prophets behind them. And on the right egg, you can see the entire story with the Christ first coming from the empty tomb, shown on the right side, and then going to the Hades. And you even see the little angels on the bottom beating Satan with the hammers. And that would be the end of my story, but there is one little detail, which is the name of the icon. And it clearly says in the Slavonic vyaz, on top it says obraz, which means image or an icon. And below that it says resurrection of Christ. But the icon is not really about resurrection of Christ. It's more about going into the Hades and struggle between good and evil at the depths of hell. So maybe the iconographer got confused and put the wrong name on this icon. Or maybe he meant only the upper part would be the resurrection and somehow didn't put the name of harrowing of hell or descent into the Hades on the bottom. But when we look at the 17th century icon, which we've seen before, it has the same exact name, even though resurrection of Christ is not shown on it at all. It only talks about the second part of the story. So here we can think maybe when this image came to the Russian iconography, somehow they got confused between the name of the image and depiction of it. But when we go to the Byzantine example, it clearly says Agia Anastasis, which in Greek means resurrection of Christ. So what does it really mean? And when we think of it, we understand what its translation, where it's failing us. It's really not the resurrection of Christ, but it's resurrection by Christ. It's a resurrection by Christ of the humanity, of the entire humanity, and all the righteous who were born again. And showing by that the prophecy Christ made when he met Nicodemus in the first time while he still was alive as a man. And on that, I want to end my presentation, and I want to thank you all. And I also want to thank all the medical workers and doctors who keep us healthy and work on the front line in this difficult time. And now to you, Nico.
Hi there. Sorry, can you all see my screen? Great. Hi there, everyone. My name is Nicholson. I'm so happy to be here. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Museum of Russian Icons for setting up this webinar. And I really do remain very hopeful that everyone online with us today will be able finally to visit this beautiful exhibition, which was planned to open this past Easter. While my colleague Karen focused very particularly on the objects which are within the exhibition, and my colleague Dimitry spoke about the theories behind some of the images you can see in the exhibition, my talk, which I hope will be fairly brief, is going to focus more on the relationship between the House of Romanov and the International Red Cross. The image of the Red Cross is something we see several times in the exhibition, particularly at the end when it is associated with the beginning of the First World War. Today, we're very much aware of the importance of first responders and medical professionals in crises and in war, but in the middle of the 19th century, this was a completely novel idea. In 1855, Grand Duchess Yelena Pavlovna opened the Sisters of the Holy Cross community in Sevastopol during the first of the Crimean Wars. The work of that committee became so important that Russia gradually, after the acceptance of the Geneva Convention in 1864, started to open the Russian Red Cross within the boundaries of the empire. The International Red Cross began in 1867 on May 3rd in Russia, when Emperor Alexander II approved the charter of what was called the Russian Society for the Care of the Wounded and Sick. It became, in 1879, the Russian Red Cross Society. The emperor himself, all the Grand Dukes and Grand Duchesses, many high-ranking secular people and representatives of the higher clergy joined the society, which existed under the auspices of the Empress Alexandrovna. By 1877-1879, during the Russo-Turkish War, the Russian Red Cross took over almost all of the medical assistance of the army. And by 1879, the medical units of the Russian Red Cross were also fighting disease with the massive diphtheria that occurred in Poltava province. The Red Cross, after the Russo-Turkish campaign of 1878, began to issue their first jeton. A jeton is a small badge granted with a certificate, which in Imperial Russia might denote membership in a regiment, organization, or institution, or even that you were a financial patron or donor to such an institution. This jeton, by the Russian silversmith Chlebnikov, is an example of one of the earliest Russian Red Cross jetons. That same year of the introduction, Alexander II created the Russian Order of the Red Cross, and the management of the Red Cross organization passed from the ailing Empress Maria Alexandrovna to her daughter-in-law, the Tsaryevna and Grand Duchess Maria Fyodorovna, seen here at the left. The big ugly red arrow on the painting is pointing to the red ribbon of her Red Cross order, which is hidden partially by her veil and partially by the Diamond Order of St. Catherine. Second in command of the Red Cross in this period was the Grand Duchess Vladimir, also called Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna the Elder, who you can see here in a portrait by an unknown artist after the portrait by Angeli wearing her Red Cross medal. The Empress Maria Alexandrovna died and was replaced by Grand Duchess Maria, by the Tsaryevna Maria Fyodorovna, and the orders of the Red Cross began to be distributed to all of the women within the imperial family. The Order of the Red Cross was a state order of the Russian Empire, granted exclusively to women who had devoted themselves to the care of the wounded and the sick, and who through their activities and zeal in the field were rendered special merits and are known for their high moral qualities. That was the criteria of being awarded the order. Once the order was awarded, the women who had received it were allowed to use the Red Cross image anywhere they liked. They could use it on porcelain, on their stationery, they could incorporate it into their coats of arms, or they could wear them on pieces of jewelry. Persons granted the Red Cross insignia were allowed to depict it anywhere they wanted to, but the image was not allowed to be used by anyone else outside of the Red Cross. What this meant was the Grand Duchesses who became members of the order began to incorporate what we now know as the logo or seal of the Red Cross into their various organizations. And we see here a group of late 19th and early 20th century jetons from various hospitals which were founded by the Grand Duchesses. On the upper left and in the lower center, we see jetons featuring the Red Cross from the community of Grand Duchess Elizabeth Fyodorovna, who was the wife of the Governor General of Moscow. In the upper center, we see a jeton from the hospital of Princess Yevgenia Maximilianovna, who was the Duchess of Leuchtenberg and a cousin of the Russian imperial family. And in the upper right-hand corner, we see a jeton from the Mariinsky Hospital of Empress Maria Fyodorovna. These types of jetons remained popular for distribution up through the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. But as World War I drew nearer, Fabergé began to enter the fray of design, and they changed the look and feel of these honorary symbols, and they moved from something sort of military in nature to something that was also fashionable. Here are two miniature eggs with a symbol of the Red Cross by the firm of Fabergé, and you can see that the designers of the firms have freed the strong graphic logo of the Red Cross from its earlier, more Victorian settings, surrounded by message-bearing ribbons and Renaissance-style strapwork. This clean, modern representation of the symbol on an object easily worn became extremely popular and recognizable. My colleague in Russia, Valentin Skurlov, confirms that the Red Cross symbols were restricted to gifts that were ordered by the Imperial Chancellery or commissioned directly by women who were members of the Red Cross Committee. We can't confirm for sure that Fabergé didn't make and sell these to the general public, but because imperial symbols were very strictly controlled, it seems that these pieces were generally commissioned. These eggs are both by Fabergé, but the one on the left is stamped with the hallmark of Michael Perka, indicating that it was made before 1903, while the one on the right is from the period of the First World War, which is what most of the pieces in our exhibition come from. The Chancellery ordered the large majority of Red Cross marked pieces, and they ordered them from jewelers besides Fabergé as well. This one is in its original imperial presentation case, and it's by the jeweler Karl Bock. We know that it was from the period during the First World War because the label on the underside reads Petrograd, and the city, St. Petersburg, was changed, the name was changed to Petrograd during the First World War. You can also see here that people worked free and uneasy with the design, and Karl Bock chose to set 5 square cut rubies as the cross instead of using the enamel that was more popular. Types of objects bearing the red cross were limited to pendants and to brooches and to bar brooches. We see those in innumerable different types of forms. And you can see here used in, it's probably its most wearable iteration, the pendant, which could be worn as a necklace or attached to a large chain of other miniature objects, as we've seen in Karen's lecture. This Fabergé golden enamel red cross egg pendant was from St. Petersburg from the period of the First World War between 1908 and 1917. Here's a small brooch meant to be worn at the throat. And this piece is by Fabergé. It's in guilloché enamel on gold and surrounded by rose-cut diamonds. This is in the collection of the jewelers à la Russie in New York. This other iteration is the bar brooch, which was one of the most commonly distributed types. These were generally worn at the throat or in the midst of a lace foulard. However, there were even more interesting pieces commissioned with the Red Cross as a piece of the iconography. This is a Fabergé silver Red Cross box by one of the rare female work makers of the Fabergé firm, Anna Ringe, and it was commissioned in 1916. It was inscribed to Envy Steger, who was one of the nurses of the Red Cross, and it's now in the McFerrin collection in Houston. During the First World War, the tradition of the Grand Duchesses being involved in hospital service continued with the Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna and her daughters. In the left, you can see a wonderful postcard which was reproduced widely during the First World War, showing the Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna handing a red egg, Easter egg, to a soldier. The basket is being held by the heir Cesarevich, Grand Duke Alexei. And on the right, there's a photograph of Empress Alexandra and all of her daughters, actually, from left to right, Maria Nikolaevna, Olga Nikolaevna, Tatiana Nikolaevna, and Anastasia Nikolaevna. The 2 oldest daughters and the Empress were all certified as members of the Red Cross in 1914. And I actually have a copy of the report from 1914. On August 15th was opened the training courses for nurses in wartime. The august patroness of the community, our sovereign Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna, deigned to take the test for the title of Sister of Mercy of War. And passing this test was awarded the high honor to join the Sisters of the Community. At the end of a Malyebin prayer service for the community, our patron had the honor to bring Her Imperial Majesty and their Imperial Highnesses, her daughters, their new diplomas and the title of Wartime Sisters of Mercy. The other sisters who graduated from the course were awarded their own diplomas from the august hands of Her Majesty the Empress. 42 women were in the first class. The Empress wrote in a telegram to the chairman of the Russian Red Cross afterwards, my daughters and I heartily thank the management of the Red Cross for their expression of kindest feelings. It was a pleasure and an honor to be enrolled with the other nurses who work hard and give their lives to alleviate the suffering of our heroes. Alexandra. In 1914, in addition to the Empress and her daughters joining the Red Cross as Sisters of Mercy, the Dowager Empress was now celebrating 35 years as the head of the Russian Red Cross. Because the organization was so relevant during wartime, the imperial eggs presented in 1915 also had a Red Cross theme. The Imperial Red Cross egg with portraits, presented in 1915, is currently in the collection of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts and shows the ingenious way Fabergé tried to comply with a bit of wartime austerity. The egg's body is in silver rather than gold, with white guilloché enamel, and the Slavonic inscription reads, "Greater love hath no man than this, that he may lay down his life for his friends." The surprise is a folding screen with portraits, a device previously used by the firm for the Dowager Empress in both the Danish Palace's eggs of 1890, as well as in the Napoleonic egg of 1912. The frame depicts from left to right, in their nurses' outfits, Grand Duchess Olga Alexandrovna, the sister of the Emperor Nicholas, Grand Duchess Olga Nikolaevna, daughter of the Emperor, the Empress Alexandra at center. To her right, Grand Duchess Tatiana Nikolaevna, the second daughter of Nicholas II, and on the right, their cousin, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna the Younger, who had recently turned from Sweden to work in Russia during the war. The other egg presented that year was presented to Empress Alexandra and is another original work by Fabergé, which uses the Red Cross as its theme. This is in the museum in Cleveland. The egg shows the daughters of the empress as nurses in the exterior crosses in small portraits, and it opens to reveal an icon of the resurrection, which Dimitry has discussed at length, flanked by icons of the saints Olga of Kiev and Saint Tatiana of Rome, the patron saints of the empress's daughters. It features the monogram of the empress, and while this egg and its triptych form has frequently been cited as original and unusual even for Fabergé, I'd like to bring back an image of a beautiful icon of the resurrection in an egg-shaped frame by Maria Semyonova, which is in our exhibition. While the Fabergé design was certainly exceptional, he was in fact simply elevating a form already well known to Russians everywhere, that of the egg-shaped devotional frame, which Karen mentioned in her lecture, meant to remind all of us of the hope and promise of the resurrection every day. These Red Cross-bearing objects are particularly interesting examples of how an imperial organization and symbol could inspire an entire category of material culture that combines history, luxury, and individual personal stories within each object. For those who are interested in further information on the Red Cross, Fabergé, and the Romanovs, I recommend a really exceptional dissertation by Dr. Andrew Ringley called The Romanovs Militant Charity, which provides a thorough history of the Russian Red Cross from its foundation up until the First World War. Since 2013, there have been more than a few pieces written on Fabergé and the Red Cross, and I recommend some interesting research by Crystal McCandless, which is currently on her Fabergé research site, fabergéresearch.com. Again, I want to thank all of you for your attention and this quick run through some Red Cross items, and I'm going to turn us back over to our digital host. I don't know how to stop. There we go.
Okay. So I have everybody unmuted now, so we can get ready for the question and answer segment. But first, let me thank all of you, Karen, Dimitry, Nick. Again, this exhibition would not have been possible without all of your hard work, and I think it all really paid off. So I'm going to jump right into questions and answers. The first two questions are actually about Nick's presentation. So we'll start with that. What is the origin of the Red Cross? Where do we find the first use of this dramatic symbol? And did men wear this symbol as well as women?
Well, one I'm not prepared for, but actually, I believe that when the Red Cross first appeared, it was used as the symbol of St. George. It's something we see in Great Britain in their coat of arms, the Red Cross on a white field. It was probably, my guess, used during the Crusades as an image. I'm not quite sure when it became associated with medical treatment, though likely it comes from the crusading tradition of hospitaller knights who went to the Holy Land and provided both military service and medical service. The Knights of St. John and the Sovereign Military Order of Malta still do that today. As for whether men wore it as well as women, the Order of the Red Cross, which was given by the imperial government, was specifically for ladies, and the Empress served as the Grand Mistress of the Order, and all recommendations for the giving of the order came through the Empress to the Emperor. So men did not wear the Red Cross as an order. However, those jetons that we saw from the late 19th century of the various Red Cross institutions may well have been worn by men on their key fobs or watch chains or in their lapels, particularly if they were donors to the institution or if their wives worked there as members of the Red Cross Committee. Thanks, great question.
Great. And to kind of go along with that, someone would like to know, what are the 4 symbols around the Red Cross?
Oh, from the first egg, it's 1914. It was the 1914 egg. So they're rendered in a very stylized way. Sorry about that. I should have explained. You can go see that egg in Virginia.
Excellent. Well, when we can all fly again, we can go see it. All right, another question from the audience. Is there any further meaning of the images of the eggs other than the obvious resurrection, birth, etc.? Are there non-Christian examples of the egg as a symbol? And if so, what would that be a symbol of? I don't know if anybody can speak to that.
We need Nadia Kizenko. We need a professor of religious studies. Because I can think, yes, of a few things, and I do not feel on safe ground answering those. So anyone, feel free to jump in.
which is funny because we had a similar question during her presentation, and she was hoping that you could answer it. Okay, let's see. So any other questions? I know it was a lot to digest with three speakers. All right, so this is a question for Dimitry. The harrowing of hell is not canonical, question mark, apocryphal, question?
Thank you, this is a great question. The harrowing of hell is indeed canonical, but the explanation of it in the Gospel of Nicodemus is not canonical. The Gospel of Nicodemus was hi Nick. The Gospel of Nicodemus was never considered a canonical text, but at the same time, it was widely circulated and never prohibited by the Orthodoxy. So that is why you can see images from the Gospel of Nicodemus who became widely known and now considered to be a part of the Christian religion, even though they're not a part of the canon. I hope that answers your question.
Great. Another question for Dimitry. Can you speak to the production of holy images during the GPW? Did this occur?
I'm not sure what GPW is.
Great Patriotic War.
Oh, Great Patriotic War. Well, thank you, Karen. During the Great Patriotic War, the holy images were indeed produced because Stalin, in the very beginning of the war, decided to embrace the Orthodox religion as a part of a force which would unite the Russian people and bring them to fight the invasion. So actually, the World War II was the time when the Orthodox religion in the Soviet Union became allowed again after being completely prohibited during the 1930s. And the holy images are indeed produced, but not by the state.
Can I add something? I don't know if everyone can see this, but someone called Jessica Barnett sent us a very helpful comment that is, not sure if this is helpful, but a roasted egg is included as part of the Passover Seder plate, perhaps used in other religions as well. And of course, I should have thought of that. So thank you, Jessica Barnett.
All right, well, we'll give people just another minute if you have any last minute questions. I'll take this opportunity to say that the webinar is being recorded, so it will be available on the museum's website, probably Monday or Tuesday. And I will be following up with an email, again, probably on Monday, to everyone who attended today with a program survey, and that will also include the link to this webinar. So feel free to share it with family and friends. And again, I hope to see everybody at the museum real soon. I think we're all itching to get out there. All right, so I don't see any other questions coming in. So again, thank you to our speakers, and until next time, thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.